Leadership today demands more than strategy or technical skill. It requires the courage to face discomfort, uncertainty, and emotions head on. Many of us know what we should do as leaders, but actually doing it, especially when it means risking vulnerability or rejection, can feel daunting. If you've ever held back from speaking up, avoided a tough conversation, or felt stuck between wanting to act and fearing what might happen, you're not alone. That's why I'm thrilled to be joined today by Peter Bregman, who is a trusted advisor to CEOs and senior leaders around the world. He is also the best-selling author of several books, including 18 Minutes, 4 Seconds, and his latest bestseller, which will be the topic of today's conversation, Leading with Emotional Courage. Peter's work centers on that radical idea that the willingness to feel everything is the foundation of courageous action. Today, we'll unpack what emotional courage really means, why it's a secret sauce of leadership, and how you can start building that muscle in your own life and work. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we explore the stories, strategies, and insights of thought leaders who inspire us to think differently and lead better. Through candid conversations and expert perspectives, we dive into the challenges, breakthroughs, and practical lessons that shape exceptional leadership. Welcome to the program, Peter.
Thanks so much for having me. It's nice to be here with you, Charles.
Well, let's start on how you define emotional courage and why do you call it the secret sauce of leadership?
So emotional courage is sort of what it sounds like, right? Which is the courage, the willingness, the bravery to feel. And it is underlying everything that we do. So let's do a quick experiment, you and I, and it'll illustrate the importance of it. Think of a difficult conversation, Charles, that you're not having, right? A difficult conversation that you know you should have, but you're putting off. I'm not going to make you, it could be personal or professional, and I'm not going to make you say it out loud. And by the way, for those people listening, do the same. Let's not just leave this up to Charles. So if you're listening to this, think of a difficult conversation you're not having. Okay. Have you got one in your head?
I do.
Okay. Now, I'm willing to make a bet. I'm willing to bet that you know everything you need to know to have that conversation. I bet that you're perfectly skilled enough to have that conversation. And I bet that you've had time and opportunity. And those are the four things that we usually try to solve for when we're not taking action. We do time management training. I've got to manage my time more effectively, and I've got to develop my skills, and let me learn how to do this. And I need to do a little more research and make sure that's usually what we try to do to solve our inability to move forward on things or our procrastination on things. But those are not the things that get in the way, right? We all know enough, are skilled enough, have time and opportunity. And by the way, if we don't, it's like a YouTube video away and we're done, and it takes 30 seconds. So what is getting in the way? And what I argue in the book and what my experience has shown me is that you are not willing to feel something. If you're going to have that difficult conversation, you're going to have to feel something. And think about, test this out. Think of, I don't know what it is. You might have to feel the disruption of the relationship. You might have to feel their anger or their hurt or your own sense that you're hurting them, or that weird passive aggressiveness where they say, thank you for the feedback, and then they don't talk to you for 3 weeks. I don't know what it is, but if you have that conversation, you're going to risk feeling something that you don't want to feel. And if you're not willing to feel that, then you're not going to move forward on the action that might bring you that feeling. And this is true for writing something. And the reason why people have not unwritten novels that they want to continue, or they don't have difficult conversations with colleagues that holds the potential for moving forward dramatically in work that needs to be done, because they don't want to feel something. So emotional courage, the willingness to feel, and that's the statement that you made at the beginning, is very much what I have seen in operation and I believe in, which is if you are willing to feel everything, if you're willing to feel that passive aggressiveness and the hurt and the anger and the defensiveness and shame, if you're willing to feel everything, then you can do anything. Then there's nothing that stops you from moving forward. And so as leaders, as actors in the world, the demand on us and our opportunity is to increase our capacity and our willingness to feel. And if we are willing to feel everything, then we can move forward on anything.
Great insight there. And you're right. Once you're able to feel those emotions, not bypass them or deny them, but truly sit with them, you can unlock that capacity to act, which, like you mentioned, I know who it is. I know what I should say. There's been opportunities for me to say it, yet it still hasn't been done. But I found too that naming those feelings and emotions is powerful because when we bring fear and anxiety into light, we disarm it.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And also to not need to be right, right? It was not hard for me to say, I don't know, I have a sense, I want to offer it to you. This might be wrong. If it's helpful, great. If it's not, I'm off. So to your point, that's a great point, Charles. There's there are skills in taking the kinds of risks that we might otherwise fear to do that in a way that protects us from the downside.
So, what is one way, practical way, a leader can start by exercising this muscle so we can begin to build that comfort, right? And strengthen that capacity for feeling?
It's an all, this might be a little tired, but I would say do one thing every day that scares you. And it could be anything. It could be being in Starbucks and they call your name, and instead of walking up to get your cup, raise your hand and go, "That's me." Or like, what, I don't know, like something that feels unnatural. And here's, I run these leadership programs, and I have one governing design principle in leadership training, especially in training, because this is a big thing with training. And you do training, I think,
Right.
also, right? Okay. So this is good, Charles. Like the perfect dynamic in training someone to lead so that they can actually learn, not just knowledge, not just in their head, but in their bodies, is when the perceived risk is very high, but the actual risk is as close to zero as possible. So when you're in a training environment, the actual risk almost always is zero, right? There's no actual impact to failure in a training environment. But how often are we in a training environment and we resist doing something for fear of how it's going to look or how it's going to come off or what the other people will think of it or how I'll be judged or how I'll judge myself? And yet that's a dynamic where that means that the perceived risk is high. I'm not sure I want to do this, but the actual risk is always zero. That's why we do trainings, right? That's why it's useful. So if you could put yourself in situations as much as possible, including as I'm speaking to the crowd here, go to whatever trainings Charles is running. If you could put yourself in a situation where perceived risk is high and actual risk is low, that is a terrific environment for learning.
Well, and I like what you say too, kind of that emotional push up. Identify one action that may feel 15% uncomfortable, not 80%. We're building muscle, not trying to court injury, right? So start small, start consistent. Emotional courage is like strength training. It doesn't require intensity, just usually consistency over a long period of time.
I think that's true. And what I will say is there are certain environments, and again, like I'm gonna double down on this idea of training. There are certain environments where you should go ahead and lift at 80% of your capacity because that's the point of that environment. And then in your daily life, go the 15%. But there are certain times when if this is your comfort zone and you're able to have a situation for people who are just listening, my hands are relatively close together. And now I'm expanding my hands out. I'm reaching out wide. You have an opportunity to go this wide with your discomfort. You could really step far outside your comfort zone. Then when you're back in your life, then instead of it being really close, you've expanded it. Then you've expanded it 15% because you've experienced it 80%. And that's a great way to learn.
Well, that brings us into the full model, and you identify four essential traits of powerful leadership. So let's talk about each one and maybe one or two insights about each one. But first, before we get kind of dive into those, you outline these four essentials: confidence in self, connection to others, commitment to purpose, and emotional courage. Why do most people you find only master two or three? And kind of what happens when one of them is missing?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And what's great about this question too is it highlights this idea that when I think about these four, it's not like a personality assessment. It's like, well, I tend to be the guy who's high in confidence and low in connection, but that's okay. That's just me. I would discourage you from thinking in that way because, if you're high in confidence in yourself and you're low in connection to others, you are going to appear very arrogant. Like all I care about is myself, or narcissistic, or even if that's not the case. If you are unskilled at connecting with other people, but very skilled at making decisions and moving forward, I mean, you are going to feel to everybody else like you discount who they are. On the other hand, if you are deeply connected to other people, but not so confident in yourself, which some people might say, oh, that's really great. I care so much. I'm a highly empathic person. I really care about other people, but I don't really push my own perspective. Well, then you give yourself up to keep everybody around you happy. And that is the recipe for burnout. And it also loses the benefit of your contribution, right? Because it becomes all about them. And then if you are totally committed to purpose, right, you care deeply about the larger impact of what you're doing, again, which everybody lauds as really useful, but you do that at the cost of, without being confident in yourself or connected to others, then you will throw people under the bus in order to get done what you think is most important. And then you will lose them and you will lose yourself at the same time. So you really need to hold all of those. And then emotional courage is the willingness to feel that allows you to take action in all of those realms. Your original question was, why are people good at one or the other? And I think we have to answer that question properly, we have to go back to their childhoods and the point where I was rewarded for certain things as a kid. At that point, not to go too psychological on you, but this is just sort of the reality. I was rewarded for certain things as a kid. And at that point, the reward was life or death. Like if I lost the love of my parents, I wouldn't exist. So I had to do certain things to maintain their connection and love. And so I did what was rewarded. Oftentimes that was keeping them happy. So I would be more connected to myself. Sometimes that was, oh, I'm so proud of you. You performed. You're doing so great. Look at you. Look, he's walking and he's only 6 months old. And so then that makes me that's sort of the way to love, is to be confident in myself and believe in myself. And I'll say one more thing about this, Charles, which is I think it's a red herring in some ways to spend any time thinking about the question as to why I'm good at one thing or not good at another, because that's a way of delaying action.
Let's dive into that first one, and that's confidence. And really, I'd like to talk about confidence because a couple of things that we aren't going to be able to unpack all of the insights, but the first one I'd love to unpack is the fact that you're right that self-compassion is a critical foundation for confidence. And that's something that's somewhat counterintuitive because I see a lot of high-achieving leaders confuse self-compassion with weakness.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's true what you're saying, that like there's a way in which what appears confident is, I'm not gonna worry about myself. I'm just gonna like go do it. I'm gonna go make things happen. It's not about me. Which actually is a false sense of confidence. That's actually insecurity. And arrogance is actually insecurity. I'll make a distinction for you between confidence and arrogance, which in a very simple way. Arrogance sounds like I'm better than you. Confidence is I believe in myself. I also believe in you. Like I don't have to be better than you. I just have to be great. And I want you to be great too, because your being great doesn't threaten. I'm not evaluating myself in contradiction or relationship to you. I'm just evaluating like my own competence and my own ability to do that. I hope everybody around me is really confident. So, self-compassion is doesn't you actually need a tremendous amount of confidence to allow yourself to be vulnerable and to have self-compassion, to say, wow, this is hard for me. I'm going to do it, but it's hard for me. And to evaluate yourself in a way that requires self-compassion. I'm hurt, that thing that just happened, or I'm hurting. If you don't have enough confidence, you cannot risk that vulnerability. And then you have to pretend you're not hurting at all. And then that creates damage in the world, both to yourself and to other people. But if you don't step over that for yourself, it's one of those things where that leads to confidence and also requires confidence. And most of the things that lead to confidence also require confidence. And now we'll loop back to your 15% comment, which is That's not something you go at 80%. That's something you go a little bit at a time to develop confidence, to have enough confidence, to develop confidence, to have a little more confidence, to develop confidence. That's what that requires.
Let's move into kind of another kind of counterintuitive surprise from this part of the book. And you talk about owning what we normally hide. So let's explore the shadow side of leadership and what does it mean to embrace your shadow? And how does acknowledging your darker side make you a stronger leader?
Yeah, and it's actually an interesting question to even explore, what do I mean by darker side? And I think there are all sorts of things that happen to us when we try to hide parts of ourselves. And I might have even used this language in the book. I can't remember, to be honest, but I'm going to stay away from this idea of darker side. But because I don't know that it's darker actually, but let's look at the kinds of things that we hide. I might hide my greed. I might hide my jealousy. I might hide my competitiveness. I might hide, I'm trying to think of things that I might hide, my weakness, my being tired. And so why do I hide those things, right? I hide those things because I think they're bad, because they're sources of shame. Why are they sources of shame? And where does the source of shame come from? Now, at the risk of going into explaining behavior, which I've just said I think is a bad idea, I think there is some way in which all of us hold some center of shame that is deeply embedded, probably coming from experiences in early childhood, that sound something like, I am not enough. And it could look with I'm bad, or I'm ugly in some way, or I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not enough. But some version, and I would argue, having again worked with people who have achieved tremendous amount in their lives, especially people, I would say, who have achieved tremendous amount in their life, are carrying some level of shame around not being enough. And until you embrace that, until you recognize, I'm not going to hide that, I recognize that that is me. If any of you are listening to this and you're thinking, oh, I don't have any of that, and you're high achieving, especially if you're high achieving, I would ask you to sit with that a little longer, because it's not like this is the only thing that drives high achievement. There's lots of things that drive high achievement. But in my experience, some of what drives high achievement is I'm trying to prove something. And there's a point in people's careers where they realize they have proven everything they have to prove, and yet they're still driven to prove more because it's not satisfying to them. And that is the point that I think for us as human beings is very dangerous, but also very expanding, it's a massive opportunity, which is, at a certain point you realize I've got everything to prove in order to be okay. Then you're in a situation where you've proven it. And then you go, okay, now what? Now what? Like, is that enough? Am I done? Well, I'm not. So am I operating totally in a place of service? That's great. That's fulfillment looking for action, right? I'm fulfilled, and now I'm looking for where I can act in the world. I would argue that most people have a high degree of action looking for fulfillment. If I achieve this, then I will feel good. If I get this, it's the source of all marketing. If I buy this, when I finally get my Porsche, then I'll feel really good about myself. I could guarantee you that buying a Porsche will not make you feel good about yourself. I mean, I guarantee it. And I could practically guarantee, I think I could guarantee that achievement of any kind, and I have to say, like, I don't extract myself from this. I've been ranked, a ton of things, #1 coach in the world, top 8 thought leader and leadership, all these things. I've written 5 books, bestsellers. I've coached awesome people. My leadership program, #1 leadership program in the world, like all of this stuff. And every time for a very long time, I was like, wow, now, great. I wrote the HBR article, and it's the #1 most popular article in HBR. Like, now I've made it. And there is no point at which achievement brings you the satisfaction that you hope it'll bring you. And at that point, then you're in a crisis, which is actually an incredibly positive crisis, but it doesn't feel that way. There's a way in which if you don't achieve things, you have a crisis. You hit a low. If you're trying to achieve things, you don't achieve anything. There's another crisis, which I would argue is, a more pleasant one to get to, but it is also still a crisis that says I've achieved a tremendous amount, and yet I don't have that feeling that I'm hoping to have. And that's a really beautiful place to arrive at, where you could begin to question, what is it that's going to give me that feeling? And you realize you have to take achievement off the table.
I also love what you say about the shadows, that, that part of ourselves that we'd rather not see, the jealousy, the rage, the control, the insecurity. We all have it. But when we deny it, which I think is so critical here to note this, we project it onto others often. We say, I can't believe they did that, which really blinds us to our own capacity for similar actions.
Yeah, the beautiful thing about projection, there's two beautiful things about projection. One is when I'm projecting something, when I look at someone and I see the negative part of them, it's an opportunity to reflect that as a mirror and go, where is that in me? Like almost always, if you are annoyed by somebody does something that you're annoyed, or you're judging somebody, that is something that also is in you. And it doesn't mean that you have to stop judging them, but it is an opportunity to look at yourself and go, oh, I have that in me. Where do I have that in me? And how can I sit with that so that it doesn't overtake me? Because if I ignore it, to your point, it leaks out in insidious ways. Right. And maybe, if I feel that way towards someone in power, I might then, hurt someone who I have power over, right? Because I can't do it with someone in power. But there is this very beautiful flip side of that, which is when I'm looking at someone and I admire them or I idealize them and I go, wow, I love how you do this. That is also a projection. And that means that is also in you. So when you find, and what I want to encourage people to do, because it's a beautiful way to live life, look for places and people who you admire, and look for where your affection goes out to people to go, I love this aspect of this person. I'm really touched by the way this person does that. You don't see something in someone else that you don't also have in yourself. So it works in, I'll use your language, the dark side, right? On the side that you would rather not look at, but it also works on the upside, on the side of, light. I don't know, maybe we have to move away from this duality of light and dark, but it works on the side where you're impressed by someone or you love something about someone, and it gives you an opportunity to build your confidence by taking a moment to find what you see in them in yourself, because I guarantee you that it's there.
Well, in a world driven by personal branding and relevance, how can a leader practice irrelevancy without losing influence? Because relevancy is intoxicating. But the paradox is that clinging to relevance often leads to shallow leadership when we're more concerned with perception than presence.
I'm not sure I got it exactly right in the book. I think there is a way in which I have seen people's pursuit of staying relevant lead to a lot of depression, because they're incredibly famous people who have had a lot of impact. They're, the head of a World Bank, the World Bank, a very famous rock star, like people that I know personally, who ended up in older age very depressed because they knew how to be successful. They knew how to be relevant. They didn't know how to be irrelevant. On the other hand, as I get older and I see my relevance actually expand, and when I look at people older than me, mentors of mine who remain very relevant to me and very relevant in the world, the way I want to amend what I wrote in the book and to think about this thing of relevancy is, the goal is not to necessarily, and maybe I wrote this in the book, it's not to become irrelevant, it's to become okay with being irrelevant. It's the idea that you still act to impact the world. Please act to impact the world your whole life until you die. And maybe even beyond. We don't know about that part. but your whole life until you die. But if your ego is dependent upon your growing relevancy, you're likely to end up very depressed. So it's actually very personal work. And it's interesting, Charles, in my coaching, I find that the more I coach people of stature and people of wealth and people of power and impact, which I love, again, like heads of industry and heads of government and very wealthy people, billionaires. I'm constantly coming back to this place. Like, I'm not here to help you make more money. I'm not here to help you run the government. You know more about running a government than I do. Like, there's no amount of useful advice I can give you about running a government, right? I mean, I could be a sounding board. I could give you some perspectives. And by the way, I'm not a billionaire. I'm not nearly a billionaire. So, like, am I going to help the billionaire make more money? No, I guarantee you not. Like, I might help them lead their company a little bit more because maybe actually I have a little more experience with that, and I can ask you good questions like I could anybody. But the real gift that I bring in the work that I do, and the real gift, which is really, we're coming back to emotional courage, is how can we, no matter what we achieve and what we do and what kind of impact, how do we live a life of satisfaction and fulfillment and take joy in the work and the impact that we have? And that is increasingly, and I haven't always been there. I mean, I'm the person who's like, I built my company. I'm trying, that is an inside job. That is 100%. And I'm now, you're sort of, we're touching on where I'm going with my next book, I think, where we place our attention. And I'm really fascinated right now with where we place our attention and how we can choose to place our attention and how that impacts our lives. And yes, do I think it helps us to be more successful? Yes. Great. And I'm very, very happy for that. And let's be very realistic about what that success will get us. And it's not the personal fulfillment, but it doesn't stop us from getting the personal fulfillment. It's just a vehicle.
And I find ironically that when leaders let go of the need to constantly prove their value, their actual influence deepens because people can feel that you're not making it about you. Practicing irrelevancy doesn't make you invisible. In many cases, it makes you more trustworthy and deepens
100,
that level of influence.
100%. I agree with you 100%.
Let's move to connection with others. That's the next one, and I want to just profile one of the surprising pieces of this. And this is sometimes the most powerful act is the most subtle one. So you talk about the idea, the metaphor of holding the baby, and this metaphor is beautifully simple. How can leaders hold the baby in situations where they feel powerless or sidelined? But first, give us background on this metaphor and how it came to be.
Yeah, I was on a plane and we were stuck somewhere and we were on the ground for a couple of hours and people didn't know what was happening. And there was somebody who had a baby kind of near me, and the baby started crying, and everyone's annoyed. Everyone's annoyed anyway. You're hot and you're not getting where you can go. People are missing their connections. It's not a good scene. And now you've got a crying baby, and the mother is holding the baby and is frustrated and a little angry at the baby and ashamed and embarrassed and not wanting to bother other people, but and it's like it's an untenable situation, and everybody around is either annoyed, frustrated, angry, nobody, sad, tired, in uncertainty. I mean, I'm imagining most people who are listening to this probably have been in one form or another of a similar situation, probably in an airplane. And I was in that same situation. But I was also watching. I was like fascinated by the social aspect of everything that was happening. So that was giving me a point of focus. That's where my attention went. But I wasn't doing anything to help. I was just sort of watching. And then this person came up to the mother and said, "Hey, this is a tough situation. Can I hold your baby for a few minutes just to give you a break?" And you can imagine the mother was like, "Don't go anywhere near my baby," like but the mother was like, "Yeah, thank you. That would be great." And the person held the baby and stood up and shook the baby a little bit, not shook the baby, but rocked the baby. And the baby continued to cry, and I think maybe it settled down. I can't remember, but it was not even the point. The point is, everybody's upset. Everyone's in this uncontrolled situation. Everybody's stuck. Everybody is a victim, except this one person who's like, hey, there's something I can do in this situation that can alleviate someone's suffering here, that can like help a little bit. And it's not going to solve the situation. It's not going to get us off the plane. It's not going to make our connections. And by the way, it may not even stop the baby from crying. And by the way, I'm taking a risk because the mother might say no, and I might be embarrassed. I remember there was someone who was in a wheelchair going across the grass in Central Park. And I walked over and I said, hey, can I help you? And get across. And he looked at me, and the way I felt it was somewhat angrily. I know I felt shame coming out of it. He goes, look, if I need your help, I'll ask for it. I mean, I didn't know who the person was. But then I was like, okay. And I felt like, ooh, I don't ever want to do that again. That doesn't feel good. Like I felt like a jerk. And that's the risk when you're trying to help somebody. Like they might not want it, and they might say it nicely, they may not say it nicely. And that's it. But so it took a risk, but it was a risk to do something in an uncontrolled situation that had a potential of helping something in that situation. And only one person thought of it on that plane, and it was not me, but I learned a lot from it.
But I find that in leadership too, there are times when you don't have the authority, expertise, or clarity to take control, but you can always bring presence, calm, and connection. And that might mean listening attentively when tensions are high. It might mean showing compassion when others are overwhelmed. It's that active support, not dominance, that really makes the difference. And holding the baby doesn't solve every problem, but it does change the emotional tone of the room. And that's where real influence is.
Right. And I'll tell you that it certainly made the mother feel better. It definitely made the person who offered to hold the baby feel better. And then, to your point, it changed the climate.
Let's move to the third section, that's commit to purpose. And I love the story you state about Rafael Nadal and his open passion as the ideal leadership model. Why do so many workplaces suppress that kind of raw engagement of bringing your whole heart to work?
It's such an interesting question. And the story of Nadal was he won the, I don't know, US Open, anything. I mean, he's won everything. But he won one of the things that he won. And I watched him, and I was watching the match, and he jumped up and down in excitement, and then he fell on the ground and was weeping. And then he jumped up again in excitement, and then he fell again on the ground and he was weeping. And I've been there, and I had felt that the first time I ran my leadership intensive. I put everything I had into it, and I ended up, when everybody left, lying on the floor and just weeping. And it's an amazing place to be. It is an amazing place to be. And yeah, we don't do it. I think it's a very, very vulnerable place to be. It is so vulnerable to put, it almost feels uncool to like put everything that you have into something because you love it, because you care so much about it, because you want to take that risk, because you're devoted to it. It's a devotion. That's the word. It's a devotion. And I don't think we want or ask for devotion so much in organizations. I think there's anytime people talk about balance, it is not a balanced place. Devoting yourself to something is not about work-life balance. It's about exceeding work-life balance. It's like going beyond. It's like saying, I'm not going to balance. I'm going to put everything in this. And I don't know how else to say it, except I think it's like not viewed as cool. And I think there's all sorts of reasons why other people don't want to do it, so you don't do it. When you're working as a team, it's much easier to dial it in, and people might ask for it. And the head, the leader is like, I need you to be in this place. And other people are, well, that's fine. And it's totally fine. It's fine for your family to be our priority. It's fine. But what I would ask is there anywhere in your life where you have the kind of devotion to it that when you're finished, you're so energetically invested and spent that you swing back and forth between, laughter and crying, because there's so much energy in your body that needs some kind of a release. And all I could say is it's an amazing place to be. And in civil society, we don't go there that much. It's not cool. But it's unbelievably cool when you can get there.
Well, after reading the story, I feel like the key is containment, not suppression, right? It's about channeling emotion, not avoiding it. Because when a leader shows raw engagement, it signals that, hey, this matters. I'm all in. This is how you ignite teams with, not with compliance, but with conviction.
Precisely, Charles. And none of this is about repression. And it's also not about expression, right? Like, feeling everything is not about expressing everything. If, in fact, most of the time when you are expressing an emotion, it's because you can't contain it. If I lose myself to anger, it's not because I'm feeling so much anger. It's because I am so uncomfortable with feeling anger that I need to, and anger is a vulnerable, scared emotion. I get angry when I feel like something's at risk, and that's vulnerable and scared. But when I get angry, when I express anger, that's power, that's strength. When I'm angry, I'm big. So people who express anger in uncontrolled ways are uncomfortable feeling the vulnerability underneath that anger. And then they lose control of themselves. And so the key to emotional courage is being willing to feel everything without having to express it. And then you can make choices. And if you're willing to feel all the anger, then you can stop and say, okay, I'm livid right now, and I could feel it coursing through my body. Let me take a breath. Let me be willing to feel it. I'm willing to feel all of this. Now, what is the wisest next move to achieve the outcome I want to achieve? And given that I'm scared, given that I'm angry, given that I don't like where this is going, what is my greatest chance of moving it in the direction that I think it needs to go? And by the way, you may choose to express anger, but that's different than uncontrolled anger. You also might choose to listen. You might choose to express compassion. You might choose to be strategic. I don't know what the situation calls for, but you are free to make those choices when you are not controlled by the unbridled physical experience of the emotion coursing through your body.
The final piece of this framework really is emotional courage, which we've identified throughout. So I'll just end and close on this question, because you close the book with a deceptively simple question. What can I do right now that would be the most powerful use of this moment? So how can leaders use that question to unlock greater impact every day?
I would take a breath, just exactly what I said. When you feel something, take a deep breath and ask yourself, what am I feeling and where am I feeling it? Right? Because you are not your emotions. When you say, I am angry, you're not actually angry. You just have anger. It's somewhere in your body. I don't know where it is. So I locate it. And when you locate it, you're doing two things. You're bringing yourself back to the present moment, and you're realizing that it is not overtaking you. It's just in your chest or in your side or in your left pinky finger. I don't know. But you locate the emotion somewhere in your body, because it's always going to be in your body. You separate yourself from it enough while feeling it to then, and you take a breath and you take a minute to do that, to then be able to ask the question. And this is the most important question to ask when you have regained some control and your willingness to feel, what is the outcome I want? And then you act to achieve the outcome, not in reaction to the past. So if you yell at me and I'm flummoxed and I get angry and I get vulnerable and I'm scared, so I want to get angry back, and then I have no control. And I am reacting to the thing that just happened, which is you got angry at me, you yelled at me. But if you yell at me and I could take a minute and I could breathe and I ask the question, what is the outcome I want? I am choosing to respond based on the future I want to create, not based on the past that catalyzed my action. That's why it's a counterintuitive way to act, because I'm acting because of the past, but I'm responding to the future that I'm trying to create. And that's the best way to respond.
Love that. Thank you so much today, Peter, for joining me on the Good Leadership Podcast. Remind our listeners how they can get in contact with you and learn more about your work.
Probably the best place is bregmanpartners.com, www.bregman, partners.com.
Thank you so much, Peter, for joining me. And thank all of you for listening. Until next time, remember, it's not what you know, but what you do consistently that makes a difference. I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.